Hello and welcome to the sewing studio. Today I'm going to show you how to make this bag to keep your light box in, and you can see I've put a little pocket on the front which is perfect for keeping the little clips in and also the lead to the light box. So I'm just going to pop that in there. Now I made this from a scrap bag. And so you can see from the strips that they're all slightly different widths. So it doesn't matter, it's all just strips, and it's a quilt as you go method. And then we've got the strips going the opposite way on the pocket. I kept 2 of the strips for the handles, but I actually kept 4. So you can see that my handles are made from 2 different colour strips. And I took the widest ones out of the pack and set them aside for the handles. So with a scrap bag, they come in all different widths. Sometimes it's 2.5 inches, sometimes it's only 1 inch or 1 1/4 inches. So with this, there's no matching, you're just strip piecing. So I'm just going to show you what was left from my scrap bag. So I've made this quilt, I've even made the ties from the scraps, and I've made the pocket and the handles, and this is what's left. So I could still do a needle case, or I could still do something else with that. So you can see there's a lot of fabric there. So for today's demonstration, I'm actually going to do this bag. I'm going to make this bag and I'm going to use a jelly roll. The jelly roll I'm going to use is called Make Time, and this is by Moda. And I've chosen this because I can see here that we've got things that look like pins, and I thought, well, this is perfect for a sewing bag. So I'm just going to open this and have a look and see what we've got. So you can see here that we've got some pins, I've seen some scissors. So this is perfect, something that looks like cross stitch. So this is going to be real good fun to use this to make one of these bags. So I've started out with a measurement of 22 by 32, and that gives me enough that I can fold it in half. So what I've got here is I've got some calico over a piece of wadding. Let me just move that out the way carefully at the moment. I'll come back to that in a minute. So what I've got here is I've got some calico and I've got some wadding. The calico is going to form the lining of our bag, and I'm going to sew straight on to this wadding because, as I said, we need to make a bag, a quilt as you go bag. So I'm just going to take some of these strips. So I quite like this peachy one with the pins on. And I'm going to sew this down here like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this to my wadding. Now, you can trim your pieces if you want before you start. I'm just going to roughly trim them with scissors, and then at the end I'm going to trim them all up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this strip, so let's just trim that little bit off there just to make life a bit easier at the machine. And I'm going to sew down here on the right side of my strip to secure it, and that's going to be lost in the seam when we come to turn it over. Then I'm going to take another colour. So let me have a look, see what I fancy next. Quite like this blue. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the blue on top. And I'm going to sew down there. And then I'm going to flip that over. And I'm going to repeat that. So I'll explain that again in a minute. The first thing I'm going to do is attach this piece on the machine using a very scant 1/4 inch. I just want to secure it on the machine. So I'm just going over to the sewing machine, Before I do that, if you like what we do, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok. You can meet the team, you can see behind the scenes, you can also see our hints and tips and best practices, and we'll answer all of your questions in the comments below. So I'm just going to sew this to the wadding. So as I say, I've got the right side of the fabric looking at me, I've got the wadding, and then I've got my lining, which is my calico, underneath. So the next thing I'm going to do is pick up another one of these, and I'm going to lay it face down, so right sides together. And I'm going to finger press with my hands the piece of fabric that I've just stitched down, so it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to join those together. And I'll keep stopping just to check that I've still got it lined up. I'll just come back over and show you on the other camera. So I'm just going to cut this bit off the bottom here. And then if I show you, we're going to flip that over. And I'm just going to finger press this back. I'm not going to press it with the iron. I'm just going to finger press it back. So I'm just going to repeat this process. So now I'm going to choose another strip. So I'm going to choose this lovely stripy white and pink, and I'm going to lay that on there. I'll show you under this camera. I'm going to lay that on there like that, and I'm going to sew all the way down again using 1/4 of an inch. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to do that until I have completed this piece here. So you can see now that we've joined all of our strips and they've gone through our calico. So this is like our mini quilt. And we're now going to turn this into our bag. So the piece of wadding was cut at 20 by 32. So I'm just going to turn this over and I'm just going to trim up these ends so that I've got a nice square piece of wadding. So I'm just going to trim these up, try and square this off a little bit. And you can see that this last one here isn't going to be a full strip. And that's why it was great doing this from a scrap bag, because all of the strips were different widths. So you could, if you wanted to, use up all of your scraps and just cut them into random width strips. So for today, I'm just going to trim this one off. Might be easier if I fold it in half. I'm just going to pull it out carefully. And just trim that off, but I'm not going to waste that. I might actually use that piece as my ties. So I'll show you on the other bag. So on this bag, you can see I've got these thinner pieces. So I could use these as the ties if I wanted to. So the next thing to do is the pocket, and you'll see that the pocket, the strips are going the opposite way. So we want to put the pocket on before we actually do our side seams. So I've measured a piece of fabric, or 2 pieces of fabric. So I've got the pocket lining. Let me show you again on this one. So I've got the pocket lining and I've got the strips. So you could do this with wadding again if you wanted to, but what I did was I did the quilt as you go on 1 piece of fabric. I'll show you what I mean. Let's get some of these strips that I've used. So I did the quilt as you go on here, like this. I'm going to sew it and then flip it. Oh, we'll do all pins, shall we? And sew it and flip it and make a piece of fabric. And then I'm going to put the right sides together and turn it through and make a pocket. So I'm just going over to the machine to do that. So I'm just going to stitch the first strip down really close to the edge. And I'm going to lay the next strip face down. And the thing to remember when you're doing strips is to sew from opposite ends. So you can see that I've turned this around now, because if you don't do that, if you keep sewing the same way, you can end up with a bit of a wave. So now I'm going to sew this one. And you can see here, I'm just a little bit short. So I can either put another strip on, or I can decide to make my pocket fractionally smaller. So I'm actually just going to use one of those little pieces that I cut off of the dark fabric. So I'm going to give that a press. I'm going to trim it all up so it's the same size as the back, and then I'm going to sew the lining on. So you can see that I've trimmed the fabric to the same size, and I'm now putting another piece of the background fabric, and I'm going to sew these together. So this is going to form the lining of our pocket. So I'm going to work out where I want the top or the bottom, and I'm going to leave a gap. So we haven't got very much of this dark one here, so that may or may not show when we've gone all the way around. So I'm probably going to leave that as our top. So I'm going to start at the other end and leave a gap for turning. So this will be the bottom of our pocket. So you can see I've already snipped my corners off, being careful not to cut through my stitching, and I'm now going to turn this through so we've got the right sides on the outside. And then I'm going to go over to the iron and I'm going to give that a little press and close the gap. I quite like how that top's come out. That looks like a little bit of binding there. So just going to go to the iron and press that. So this is our pocket, and you can see here that we've got the gap at the bottom. So I'm going to take our bag and work out where I want the pocket to go. So I'm going to put this on before I do my side seams. So this is going to be the front of our bag. Let's just have a look. Yeah, this is going to be the front of our bag. So I'm going to place the pocket where I want it. So you can measure in to make sure that you get it in the middle. And that's 6 inches there. So I just need to slide it over that way a little bit. So that's 6, see, that's 6.5, 7 inches there. 6.5, 7 inches there. So that's more in the middle. So then I'm going to pop some pins in. And then I'm going to machine this down here across the bottom, and that will then close this gap here of our pocket and then up the other side. So I'm just going to the machine to do that. So whilst I went to sew the pocket on, I've also sewn the side seams. So I've just folded it in half and sewn up the sides. So I'll just turn it through the right way and you'll be able to see the pocket as well. So you can see there that the pocket's on. Let's just trim that little bit of thread there. So the pocket's on and I've stitched up the side seams. So the next thing for you to do is to put your binding on. And now perfectly, because these are 2.5 inch strips, you can sew these together. You can work out how many you need to go round. So you can join 2 together, or you can do a scrappy binding using up all your bits and pieces. So you would put your binding on and then you would put your straps on. So I'm just going to come back to the one that I made before. You can see here that I did 2 different bindings. You can see I've got a light one and a dark one. And I just went round and did the binding. And what I did was I put the binding on, I sewed it on completely. And then when I wanted to do these 2 little ties, before I hand stitched this bit down, I just unpicked a few stitches very carefully and poked this in and then restitched over it, flipped my binding over and hand stitched it down, because that way you don't get them moving when you're trying to poke them into your binding. So that was the next stage. And then finally the handles. So I sewed 2 strips together. So I would sew 2 of these. Let's get a bigger piece. So I would sew 2 of these right sides together. And then what I would do is I would put a piece of wadding in the middle and then fold it over and stitch down. So we have got another tutorial on how to put these quilted handles in. And then I've done, you can see I've stitched there, there, there and there, just to make them stronger. And then I've sewn them on the inside of the bag. So I've just gone round, show you on that camera there. So I've just put them inside and I've just stitched a square, and I've done that in 4 places. I measured it from there to make sure that I'd got them in the right place. And so I've got the straps like that for my light box bag with my ties. So you could put a popper on it, you could put a flap over it if you wanted to. So as I always say, make it your own, have fun, and I look forward to seeing you next time here in the sewing studio.